All right, since NewsNation's groundbreaking reporting on the government's alleged UFO recovery program, some lawmakers have been crusading for the Pentagon and other government agencies to disclose more of what they know. At the center of it all is David Grusch, the former Air Force intelligence officer who told NewsNation exclusively about what he says he uncovered, and even more intriguing, what he legally cannot say because it's classified. Lawmakers were trying to learn more about those secrets, but now it all seems to have hit some major turbulence. NewsNation's Joe Khalil is live in Washington for us. And Joe, this is all to do with the spending bill. Explain.
Yeah, it's the big defense bill annually that they put forward every single year. And for those following, and we've been covering it, there was an amendment to it that required pretty unprecedented disclosure by the government of these UFO or UAP files. Well, it made it into the final bill, which is good for the people pushing for that disclosure, but it was significantly watered down. So there's now some disappointment that it no longer is going to have the impact or the enforcement teeth that it otherwise would have. Congress's annual defense funding bill is in, all 3,093 pages of it. Included in it, an unprecedented measure to disclose classified government records relating to UFOs or UAPs, sponsored by the most powerful man in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and Republican Mike Rounds. It would disclose records on, as the bill says, technologies of unknown origin and non-human intelligence. But the final version, in legislative text, doesn't go nearly as far as Schumer intended.
The measure I championed with Senator Rounds would create a board, just like we did with the JFK assassination records, to work through the declassification of many government records on UAPs. This model's been a terrific success for decades. It should be used again with UAPs, but once again, House Republicans are ready to kill this bipartisan provision.
Schumer blamed House Republicans for fighting back against his efforts for more disclosure. Two key pieces of his measure were ultimately stripped out, per our sources, influenced by the House Intelligence Committee. One would have created a 10-person panel, each chosen directly by the president, to sort through which records would be immediately disclosed. The second would have given the government full possession of all recovered, quote, non-human technology that's currently being kept by private entities like defense contractors. That, too, stripped from the bill.
The risk for confusion and misinformation is high if the government isn't willing to be transparent.
Sources had been telling NewsNation for weeks these pieces of the bill were at risk of being cut. A bipartisan group of House members raised alarm bells, saying even their efforts as sitting lawmakers to get access to UAP information were stonewalled.
If none of this exists, if this is all false, why at every turn are there people trying to stop the transparency and the disclosure?
The pushback to disclosure, according to the bill itself, is national security. It now includes a list of exemptions for disclosing UAP records if the disclosures, quote, pose a threat to national defense, compromise national intelligence, threaten sources and methods of intel gathering, or compromise any federal agents. So, Elizabeth, people who are pushing for more disclosure are concerned that the list of exemptions in the bill does provide a lot of cover for the government and for agencies to deny disclosure now in this version and basically say it could be a national security thing, so we're not going to release the documents that we otherwise would expect.
6 months to the day since former Air Force intelligence officer turned whistleblower David Grusch came on NewsNation and made an earth-shattering claim. He alleged the U.S. government has a top-secret program that has been studying and reverse engineering non-human original technical vehicles, basically UFOs, since before World War II.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No. I thought it was totally nuts, and I thought at first I was being deceived. It was a ruse. People started confiding in me. They approached me. I have plenty of current and former senior intelligence officers that came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me they were a part of a program. They named the program. I've never heard of it.
He'd never heard of the program, but now the whole world has, because not only did that interview put Grusch on the map, it put him in the hot seat on Capitol Hill. Grusch testified in front of Congress alongside two other military veterans, all three telling lawmakers and the public what they knew about unidentified anomalous phenomenon, UAPs, which is the new word for UFOs. What he says our government knows about them.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Grusch is no publicity hound. Since that day, he's remained protective over those sources and very respectful of security obligations, only giving a handful of interviews on the subject. But tonight I sat down with him for a wide-ranging conversation. We started with the latest news that key portions of an unprecedented measure to disclose classified government records relating to UAPs, those measures were stripped from the annual defense spending bill. It was not the news Grusch was hoping for. David, we just heard that two key provisions were killed from this defense bill that basically water down the requirement to make public any information about spacecraft, about alien remains. I take it you're disappointed.
Yes, thank you for having me on today. And, what we're witnessing right now is, quite frankly, the greatest legislative failure in American history. You had a very strong amendment for government transparency on this issue, whether you believe my allegations or not. This is a government transparency issue at large. And, the legislation was modeled off of, previous government transparency issues. So we had a mixed bag of success, right? If we believe the conference report that was submitted last week, Section 1687, which effectively fences off money to illegal special access programs, something that Marco Rubio, Mark Warner, and his staff on the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence championed. That did make it through conference, and I do congratulate the senators that pushed hard to make sure that that was not removed during conference to help further this effort.
It leaves the door open for anything that is, quote, national security, we get to keep secret.
100%, and that's why we were going to have a neutral 9-person panel, and all that was enumerated in the Schumer rounds, amendment earlier this year, and that was not written in a vacuum. That was written, with other individuals bringing them information as well.
All right. Were you hoping to be on that panel, that 9-person panel that would make those decisions on what had to stay secret and what could be made public?
Certainly, it's not my place to be on the panel. I certainly offered through certain staff up to the White House. I would be happy to participate. I'm happy to get coffee, for God's sakes. But you do know I was actually behind the scenes interviewing former undersecretaries, former general officers, Nobel laureate type folks that would fill those specific billets on the, URRB, which is the disclosure panel that was described in the Schumer amendments. So there are certainly people of high repute that were willing to serve on that panel to do their best to provide the president a recommendation on what he should disclose. And now that the panel is not signed into public law on the legislative branch side, we need to advocate for the executive branch, the office of the president through executive action, to instate such a body to advise him on the best course of action now that, Congress has failed to legislate appropriately. And I'm here to, praise and admonish. Certainly the Senate, thank you for proposing that legislation. I'm glad you got some provisions passed. But folks in the House, total failure. It's one of the biggest failures probably in the history of Congress.
We're going to dissect a little bit more of that interview I just did with UFO whistleblower David Grusch. Lawmakers, as we've said, have watered down rules in the defense bill that would have released information to the public about government UFO projects. Grusch is vowing to press on with his campaign to get more secrets out to the public. And for the first time, he says he does have firsthand knowledge of the government UFO program. So joining us now is NewsNation special correspondent Ross Coulthart. He was the first to interview David and brought the world all of his revelations. Ross, what do you know anything about this firsthand information that he has? He says he's writing and going to release in the next week or so some sort of op-ed with new firsthand information. Do you know what he's talking about?
I do. Yeah, I've got a pretty good idea, Elizabeth. And hello once again. I'm actually very excited that you've managed to pull that out of him, because I've been waiting for a while for him to provide a rejoinder to the critics who've constantly asserted that there is no first-hand evidence. I can't talk with any specificity because I frankly don't know. I suspect it's something to do with either photographic or video material that he may have seen, but I'm only speculating. But I just want to emphasise as well, for the people who say that there is no first-hand evidence involving David Grusch, they miss the significance time and time again of the finding made by the Inspector General of the intelligence community when he referred David Grusch's matter to Congress for investigation, that Mr. Grusch's allegations were credible and urgent.
Yeah.
And he based that not just on Mr. Grusch's allegations, but on the first-hand evidence of multiple witnesses, in fact, dozens of witnesses who've since come forward over the past 2 years to give evidence to Congress. So there is a multiple number of witnesses that have come forward to Congress. And the maddening, frustrating thing is that we're now hindered by virtue of this gag put through on this legislation. There's no longer going to be this Presidential Records Review Panel that would have allowed us the opportunity to get this information slowly declassified.
Yeah, like right now, Ross, anybody can just say, oh, that violates national security, take that one out. We can't. I mean, Ross, it comes back to, I deliberately read that quote from Congressman Moskowitz from Florida to David Grusch, because he wasn't at first a believer in this. He thought it was all like nonsense. But once he was convinced that there is something there, because every time he asked questions and started, as he said, pull on a thread, we got stonewalled. In other words, this enormous effort to shut everything down seems to have actually had the unintended effect of creating a few more believers.
There are 2 points to make from that, Elizabeth. Firstly, as you pointed out in your interview with David, if there's nothing to hide, why did they fight so hard to stop legislation that would have allowed transparency? And the second issue is, frankly, that we are going to see now the coming forward of people who the government can't control. Here was an opportunity for the president and for the congressional leadership to take a leadership role in ensuring that probably the biggest story in human history is properly told and given proper custodianship by the US government, which after all, frankly, I'll say it, black and white, has presided over a cover-up for much of the last 70 to 80 years. And here was a unique opportunity from very senior people on both sides of the Congress to get legislation that would have allowed the controlled disclosure of information. And I know a lot of people say it's a very naive idea, but I can tell you, I spoke to senators, I spoke to congressmen, congresswomen, and there was a real willingness to see this brought out into the open.
Yeah.
I think what's happened is the Pentagon has won, and so have sections of the defence aerospace industry that frankly don't want to have to disclose what they know because they're frankly worried about getting into trouble.
Ross Coulthart, so interesting. We'll have much more with David tomorrow night when he'll take on those critics who've attacked him, and more on those medical records that were leaked in an effort to impugn his credibility. So great to see you again, Ross. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine.
I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years.
Following concerning reports from multiple esteemed and credentialed current and former military and intelligence community individuals that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs.
Back in July, you remember that? I do. My eyes popped wide open. Whistleblower David Grusch testified before a House committee that the federal government is operating a UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. It was a stunning public allegation that the Pentagon has denied, although they allowed him to say it. Despite that, Congress is now on the brink of passing legislation that would require the U.S. government to reveal what it knows and does about UFOs. The term now used is UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. The Senate Majority Leader co-sponsored a resolution. It's called the UAP Disclosure Act. So it could be going places. What does it all mean? Here to talk about it is political activist, disclosure advocate, Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group, which has worked to get the government to disclose UFO information since 1996. Stephen, glad to have you here. Is David Grusch's testimony considered authoritative? Because again, my understanding was he'd heard from people who had knowledge of this. He hadn't actually seen it himself.
David Grusch was working for the UAP task force. His job was to get information. He was reported information appropriately by people within unacknowledged special access programs that were working on non-human technology. 2 people. He then contacted a number, 20 or more, of his contacts that he had developed through years of working in intelligence, because that's what his job was. And many of these 20 individuals confirmed the information he got was in fact correct. And so, yeah, it's totally legitimate. And let me be quite clear here. The United States government has known about the non-human presence and the non-human technology since at least 1947. They're fully aware of it. They've invested huge amounts of money in the research and so forth. All of this has been done in fully classified settings. And the truth of it has been kept from the American people under what I call a truth embargo. That truth embargo is collapsing. One person after another is coming forward and publicly stating there's an extraterrestrial presence. Tim Burchett, Gary Nolan, Nobel Prize winner, astronaut Gordon Mitchell, right? And I can go on and on. And so what is happening now is they have put together, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, I mean, the majority of Americans, when you look at polls, they believe something's out there. I mean, I remember when Bill Clinton took office, in all the books, you know, about his presidency, the first thing he wanted to know when he got in there, tell me about the aliens. But it seems like nobody ever knows anything. Would this UAP Disclosure Act do anything? For instance, we have laws saying you have to disclose everything about the JFK assassination. We still don't have all that information. I mean, presidents keep saying, no, you don't have to do that. Would this make a difference?
The extraterrestrial presence is about 1,000 times more important than the assassination of JFK. I really don't know to what extent that law is being used, don't care. The law that is being passed now is not the UAP Disclosure Act. There was substantial pushback that came from defense contractors that it vehemently had nothing to do with an eminent domain clause. And there are those that want the truth embargo to go on forever that were not happy about the subpoena powers. And so they rewrote the act. It's about 1/3 the size of the original one. It's not called the UAP Disclosure Act, but it is the 4th tranche of legislation regarding this issue. And all of this is being put together, not so the government can find out what's going on. They already know what's going on. They've known for 7 decades. All of this structure that's being put together, including Aero, bringing in NASA and so forth, is to prepare for the day after the president confirming this formally to us. That is called disclosure with a capital D. And the only thing between us and that right now is that while the House has held a one-day hearing with David Grusch and others, which was a fine hearing put together by Tim Burchett, Anna Paulina Luna, and Nancy Mace, all heroes. It is the Senate Intel Committee that's leading this. Mark Warner, Marco Rubio, and now Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader. And there are witnesses, dozens of them, ready to testify before the Senate Intel Committee right now. And I have an activist movement underway to get that hearing in January.
What will they tell them?
Those witnesses, when they testify, will blow the truth embargo wide open.
Tell me, okay, break it here for us, though, because I guess I have seen the videos, and I think a lot of us have open minds, like, these look weird. They're stopping, starting, hovering, disappearing. We get that. We hear this is non-human biology and the whatever that, you know, Grusch is saying. But, I mean, I'm sure when you started publishing back in 1996, people said, this guy's a kook. Now people are saying, well, actually, what is going on here? What are you saying they're hiding?
They've embargoed the fact that we are being gauged by extraterrestrials They have multiple crashed ET vehicles. They have ET bodies. They have been researching that, tracking them in classified programs. There have been thousands of books written about it. Some of them are behind me right now. The evidence is overwhelming. The truth embargo is collapsing. Let me be clear. What you're seeing now is the end of a policy of denying that there is an extraterrestrial presence. That policy is coming to an end. Once the intel hearings are held, for witnesses every bit as powerful as Grusch and more, the president will be in a position to come forward and end the truth embargo. When he ends the truth embargo and states that we're being engaged by non-human extraterrestrial technology, that is disclosure. It is the most profound event in human history. And let me be clear, since I've tracked the media on this for 26 years, I have 15,000 articles linked on my website. The media has covered it, but they haven't investigated. The media in this country has gone along with the truth embargo as an institutional policy. Eventually, the media is going to have to explain how they missed the biggest story in history and are still kind of out in the woods trying to figure out what's going on. And I've talked to so much media you can't imagine. And they'll have an answer for that. All I'm telling you is what is happening is the end of the truth embargo.
Let's end on this, Stephen. I mean, media, we're snoops. We want the scoop. So I don't think there's some big conspiracy to keep this under wraps. So tell me, do you think this is going to... Okay. Do you think this is going to pass? And if it does, given your interest, for decades, what is the first thing you control left to find in these documents?
The Disclosure Act was set up as it was originally written. It's been changed now. It's been modified. That's okay. The Disclosure Act was the final piece of the puzzle preparing for the truth embargo to end, for disclosure by the president. The UAP Disclosure Act included eminent domain for the non-human technology where the defense contractors wanted nothing to do. It set up a number of review processes giving the highest classification to certain members of Congress, as well as a 9-person presidential review, or not presidential, but UAP review board, all right, as well as subpoena powers. It was set up to start the process in which everything that our government has regarding this issue in its secret classified world, which is massive, to start bringing it forward and eventually give it to the public and put it in the National Archives. It was the last piece of the puzzle, right? The last piece of the infrastructure, because when the president discloses the ET presence, the day after, the government has got to be ready to rock because it's going to be enormously complicated.
As you said, ready to rock.
Let's see. Them telling us.
Thank you. I'm so sorry we're running short on time. Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group. I know you've been at this for so long. Thank you for your time. We'll be watching this, and if it happens, hey, please come back. Thank you so much.